I'm Rachel, and today we will be talking about the possibility of a vaccine for misinformation. I'm going to explain the difficulties associated with rebutting misinformation before moving on to this novel application of inoculation theory. But first, let's see an example of the impact of misinformation. As we can see here, 97% of climate scientists endorse the position that the climate is changing and that humans are causing it. However, only 17% of the American population actually believe this consensus is above 90%. This has implications on all kinds of things, like belief in scientists and support for climate mitigation. We could talk about this for ages, but we'll have to bank it for later. Now, it's not just beliefs about climate change infected by misinformation. We see this across health issues like vaccines, consumption of genetically modified organisms, physical issues such as climate change and 5G, and even political matters. A common definition of misinformation contains two key elements. Firstly, a claim that is initially presented as true, and secondly, its rejection by the scientific evidence. Information, and more pointedly, misinformation, can go viral on our digital environment without the need for supporting evidence. And similarly, as we all know, viral infections are equally difficult to track and manage. So why do we believe misinformation? When we have insufficient knowledge or motivation to judge the merit of a claim, we rely on mental heuristics, which are basically shortcuts that make interpreting information less taxing. This is like when we ask ourselves, have I heard this before? Does it fit in with what I know? And what do the experts think? The key point here is that these shortcuts are vulnerable to a confirmation bias, which makes us favour information that confirms our already existing beliefs. Previous research has shown that attempts to correct misinformation have been largely ineffective, leading to the misinformed belief actually being strengthened. Worryingly, people have also shown greater vulnerability to the repetition of misinformation rather than repeated corrections. This brings us to inoculating people against misinformation. First, let us consider what a biological vaccine does. Vaccines induce immunity by imitating an infection. This type of infection almost never causes an illness beyond minor symptoms like a fever. When the infection leaves the body, we are left with a memory for how to fight the disease, preventing future infection. Similarly, research following inoculation theory involves using a weak dose of misinformation to stimulate protection against future exposure. These inoculating elements include warning people of the threat of being misled and the flaws in the misinformation that's circulating. Early studies taking this inoculation approach have been able to neutralize the effect of misinformation exposure, much like a vaccine preventing future infection. Just imagine, if people can be vaccinated against misinformation in settings like schools and community groups, we have the potential to improve the overall quality of information both online and offline, as people would no longer be a vehicle for transmission of misinformation and better able to make rational and informed decisions, leading to better outcomes for themselves, their families, communities, and society as a whole. So who are we targeting with this approach? Following the SEIR epidemic model of infectious diseases, the most effective way to reduce the spread of a contagion is to target the susceptible. This means that we don't need to waste vaccination efforts on the already infected, or in this case, misinformed. There's still much to be explored in this area. For example, to determine the large-scale effectiveness of this inoculation, we need to know the reproduction rate of misinformation. This R0 value is the expected number of cases in a population of susceptible individuals generated directly by just one case. This value then allows mathematical modelling of the proportion of a population that need to be immunised. Researchers are currently developing a psychological inoculation that can neutralise the effect of misinformation across topics. This would preemptively equip people with the skills to reject misinformation that hasn't even been developed yet. Using our timely vaccination analogy, this would be like finding a biological vaccine that could protect you from every infectious disease ever. Thanks so much for listening. Please remember to think again before you share.